Hey guys, it's the voice, Michael Chavello from Down Under. You're listening to Jeffrey Wilson. It's me speaking to you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are locked and loaded, ready to go for another episode of It's Me Speaking to You. Jeffrey Wilson, just hanging out, riding shotgun here. And tonight we're going to talk, wow, shocker, a little bit more wrestling. Last week we had on the NWA heavyweight champion of the world, Nick Aldis. Very, very cool conversation. 14-year-old Jeffrey Wilson had to keep himself in check talking to the champ. But today, man, it's we're going to talk a little bit about how we met, et cetera, et cetera. But he goes back, man. He goes back to one of my favorite territories, and that is the Memphis territory. One of the most successful, most prolific territories in the history of the wrestling business, without a shadow of a doubt. He's also the host of Kentucky Fried Wrasslin, where he's talked to a little bit of everybody, because as we're going to talk to, he was a part of making that magic in Mid-South Wrestling. Travis Scott Bowden. I'm sorry. Scott Bowden is with us today. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. You didn't tip me off that I was following the NWA World Heavyweight Champion.
Well,
because I grew up old school, man.
Yeah, I know you did.
I still have a great deal of respect for that 10 pounds of gold and who's ever carrying it right now. But so that's wow. I'm
no pressure.
I'm incredibly humbled.
Well, as we get into it, man, you've really seen them all, and again, that Memphis territory is something that is. I mean, the history just goes back so very far. You've seen people before they were huge. The Rock, when he was Flex, whatever that was.
Flex Cabana.
Cabana.
I don't know why he changed from that.
Yeah. Well, the move to Rocky Maivia seemed to work out really nice for him, so I don't know.
Well, yeah, but that did lead to, there was like a steady evolution there, because everybody knows, he's Rocky Johnson's son, who was a big Memphis legend. And
yes.
Oddly enough, they decided not to mention that. They wanted him, I guess, to just stand on his own 2 feet, and came in and was just a really great guy. And, I look way past the athleticism of it all. Clearly he had the goods. He was he was on the Miami team that won the national championship.
Yes.
In the mid '90s, and I love college football, and so we would always talk about that. And really friendly guy and funny, and it was just I was like, and I remember thinking, I was like, gosh, is this guy? And this, it seems ridiculous in hindsight, but I was like thinking, is this guy ever going to be able to translate that coolness and that swagger and how funny he is that ever going to translate to the camera? Because you never saw it while you were in Memphis. I think he would be the first to admit this. He had this idea of what a baby face was supposed to be, smiling and slapping hands and that kind of thing. And actually, it was really funny. He had a very common nervous tick that Jerry Lawler had when the King first started getting that singles push in the 70s, and that he was so happy to be in there that it betrayed him, and he was always smiling in the ring. And if you're in this fierce athletic contest where basically anything goes, especially in Memphis, you're gonna have a bevy of emotions come over your face. You're gonna run the gamut, and he was just always grinning from ear to ear. So they had to have a little talk with him really quickly. But you knew right away that he was special. But I had my doubts whether or not it was ever going to work, but it all fell into them adapting and taking what they were given and going
without a doubt.
Kind of going with what the fans were giving him. The fans really turned him, and then when he actually turned against them is when they started to like him.
Well, and that's something I want to ask you about, because I mean, obviously he was at the opposite end of the spectrum as far as Memphis wrestling. You got your Joe LeDukes almost cutting his arm off with an axe on national TV, but then you got your smiling kind of Rocky Maivia, and that's kind of what I talked to the champ Nick about. From his Brutus Magnus and even, your Flex Cabanas, your Ring Masters, your Stunning Steve. It takes that kind of evolution. Obviously, they're in the business long enough time. And usually, and I think Arn Anderson said it, and I think Stone Cold's even said it, and probably The Rock as well, it seems to work the best when you're not having to work some gimmick where, I mean, obviously it's not the case for like The Undertaker, but for a lot of these guys, man, they're the best when they can just be themselves.
Yeah, it's Jim Cornette put it this way, and I've always liked it because it especially applies to him. it's be yourself with the volume turned way up.
Yes. Yes.
And which does not mean go out there and yell every single promo, because typically you go in and you study things and you kind of see how everyone else is doing a promo, or the way it used to be before they were so scripted and so rigid.
I saw one the other day, and I mean I just love the YouTube, and just going back, it was back then it was Handsome Jimmy, but it was a Jimmy Valiant promo, and he comes out, I think it was Gordon. He's like, Gordon, I'm not going to come out here. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to start screaming. Like within minutes. And I'm telling you what, Paul Jones. I mean, it was just like,
yeah.
I thought we weren't going to start yelling and screaming.
Yeah, and the best guy at that in a single interview would always be Jimmy Hart, because the fans who have only seen WWE Jimmy Hart or WCW Jimmy Hart, you really owe it to yourselves to check out, in my opinion, the greatest manager of that era, without a doubt, was Jimmy Hart in Memphis. Just hysterical, but you wanted to kill him. And everything was there was so much of it that was just done off the cuff. I mean, you might get a few bullet points, but especially if Lawler were booking, they'd still be writing the format at 10:45, getting ready to go live at 11.
So WCW wasn't the only Nitro was the only show doing that.
Well, no, but in a very I know it sounds ridiculous, but those guys were pros, and they and they had a grasp of the overall picture, which I think that's the difference between a promotion like Memphis and WCW. They grasped where they were going in the big picture.
Well, and I would highly suggest, and I saw it a couple of years ago, Memphis Heat, this true story of Memphis wrestling. I mean, that again, there's such a rich history there, going back to your Lynn Rossies, your Sputnik Monroe, your Billy Wicks. I mean, selling out, I forget the stadium there in Kentucky or Memphis, wherever. I mean, just when wrestling was wrestling, and it was just incredible to hear the whole story of really the history, your Jackie Fargos, etc. And I want to get more into that, but like I ask almost anybody who's you are, when I say nerd, like I'm a nerd too, so this isn't a negative connotation. You've really nerded out on professional wrestling, and I'm right there with you. When did that start for you, man? Because I mean, to tell our guests, or to tell our listeners, going back, you could see Travis Scott Bowden as a very young man doing interviews with Lance Russell and on Memphis TV. So once I found out who you were, and I'm going to talk after you answer this question how we met. When did the bug bite you, man?
Really, officially in the summer of '77, there was this fantastic Lawler and Dundee feud. And when I say Dundee, I'm talking about Bill Dundee, superstar Bill Dundee, who's about, he's about 5'6", if
right.
that. And, they called him the scrappy little Aussie, the Australian bulldog. And he was just one of those guys who fit in it was always like the classic David and Goliath. At first he came in as the cheeky heel, right, who could take all these incredible bumps that nobody in the territory had been able to do. He came over with George Barnes from Australia, and then Barnes eventually got homesick. And they happen, so much of the business is right place at the right time. And
sure.
Lawler had a falling out with Jerry Jarrett and was banished to Florida and Alabama. And Dundee and Barnes came in right after he left. And really the houses didn't miss a beat. And what's incredible about the Memphis territory is that they were able to you mentioned earlier, the Mid-South Coliseum, is that they were able to draw weekly.
Every Monday, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Every Monday night in Memphis, between typically 6,000 and 9,000 people, and then with probably about 6 or 7 sellouts peppered in.
And that's something I geek out on Jim Cornette's podcast, quite often, even yours. It's when people talk about how wrestling's better or whatever, for maybe 3 or 4 guys, but Jerry Lawler was literally able to make a career and a fantastic living because of Monday night selling out every single week for years. Just don't happen anymore.
Well, they didn't sell out. Of course, the way they remember things
sold
today.
out quite a bit. Sold out quite a bit.
Yeah, they drew very well consistently, running the same towns, not just Memphis, but Memphis, Louisville, Evansville, and because of that, that's one reason why guys got so much better if they listened and they came in with a strong work ethic, because they couldn't repeat the same match every week because they were running the same town. They were running the loop. And so you constantly had to change it up and try new things, and you really got a grasp of psychology. I mean, a guy like Rick Rude would come in, who there were so many cases of guys who were going nowhere in other territories. Paul Orndorff, Rick Rude, and Jerry Jarrett gets a hold of them, gives them a gimmick, and basically, especially in the case of Rude, who had so much natural arrogance, and just go out there and be yourself. How are you? He asked Rick. He goes, "How are you when you go into a gym? Do you feel like you own the place? When you go into a nightclub, do you feel like all the chicks are looking at you? Just act like that. Don't put on anything."
Right.
Basically saying, look, we all feel that you're an asshole.
Just be yourself, sir.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing for Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. They were not getting over in Memphis because we'd already seen the Fabulous Ones and the Rock and Roll Express.
Right.
And they decided to turn them heel, and basically they had heat with everybody in the locker room, so they were just like, hey, the way you are in the locker room, that's got you so much heat. Go out there and do that with the people. So and that's that happened with Cornette too. A lot of ostensibly he had a lot of heat with the boys because he was just so eager and just loved the business so much. And I could listen to Jimmy talk about wrestling all day long.
I mean, he's almost kind of the original, and again, I don't say this with a negative connotation, kind of the original Mark. Starting out as a photographer, his mom taking him to the matches all the time. Like that kind of passion is literally why I consider him to be one of the biggest brains. Him, J.J. Dillon, a few other guys. Like, I mean, they're some of the biggest brains, in my opinion, of the business of professional wrestling. That's why I love it when he gets so almost damn near irate. I'm glad he's getting kind of mad for me because I don't want to get my stress level up like that. But I mean, who's the guy, the dick flip guy, Joey, whatever.
Oh, Joey Ryan.
Joey Ryan. I mean, it's just like, what?
Yeah.
Really? I mean,
the way I handle that stuff, I don't even watch it.
I've never seen the guy wrestle one time. I've seen maybe a clip of the dick flip thing or whatever. But I mean, I heard what Jim kind of explained it, and that's not to kind of digress from requesting you, but that's what really upset me about All In, dude. They had the freaking tiger by the tail, and then they bring him out with a bunch of inflated dicks. I'm like, what? You just for a hot second here, you just kind of ruined this. I mean, I guess they kind of got it back on track, but to even have any kind of element in that in something that's so seemingly so pure professional wrestling with the championship match and the NWA title on the line, I'm just like, what? 3 steps forward, fucking 5 steps back. So, but whatever.
Yeah, and that one thing I want to clear up about for people who were not big wrestling fans in the early '80s or the late '70s, the audience was very diverse, and I asked Jerry Jarrett when he appeared on KFR, I said, what percentage of the audience do you think knew that the wrestling matches were predetermined? And he said, without a doubt, at least 80%.
Really?
And we're talking about the kayfabe era. And he says, they were intrigued because they didn't know quite how it was done.
Really?
And sometimes they probably felt like, that was real. What we just saw right there. They don't always go out and fake everything or whatever. But if something were particularly struck home with them, and in Memphis, they really strived. A sign hung over Jerry Jarrett's office for years: personal issues draw money, and that was always to remind them if they ever got away from that's the direction they needed to get back to.
The real. As real as possible, yeah.
Yeah, like Lawler and Dundee really did not like each other.
Right, but they drew a whole bunch of money.
Because of the fact that the Australians were able to come in after Lawler left and not miss a beat and still draw like 8,000-9,000 people. I guarantee you, as arrogant as Lawler is, he probably acted like he had no idea what was going on in Memphis. I guarantee you he knew, and it bothered him.
Was that I can't think of it, Barnett? Is that who brought those guys in? Jim Barnett?
Actually, sort of, because Barnett and Jarrett were tight. But it was that, man. It's hard to believe this. I didn't know until I had Bill on my podcast that Bobby Shane, the guy who gave Lawler the King gimmick,
oh wow,
also was the one who got Dundee booked in Memphis. So Bobby Shane,
he died in a plane crash with Gary Hart. Yeah,
he did, and he's just always intrigued me, this guy, because everyone says that he had a brilliant mind. He was a great booker, an incredible talent, and also kind of a rarity in this business. Seemed to look out for his brothers, and he told Lawler, he's like, yeah, I'm not going to use the King gimmick in Australia. Gave Lawler the first crown, and gave him the card of where he got them. And sometimes I've been able to round up a few pictures with Lawler striking the pose in the crown and Shane doing the other, and it's the exact same crown.
I guess I've kind of thought about. I've known that in the back of my head, but maybe I just took it from something recent. I saw like that Memphis Heat documentary where I forget the gentleman's name who ran the Coliseum for the longest time. I forget his name off the top of my head, but Lawler said to him, "I've sold out this place more times than Elvis Presley." He's like, "Yeah, because you're the king." That's where I kind of thought it came from. But in the back of my mind, I do recall Bobby Shane, who was the first one to really rock that king gimmick.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And Lawler was also feuding with Jackie Fargo and finally triumphed. And he had said, just kind of at a throwaway line, but this is how stuff, would evolve into something when you took it and ran with it. Lawler, like in a throwaway line, says, "Yeah, I'm the king of Memphis now," and it had bothered him that everyone said that the Mid-South Coliseum was, the house that Elvis built. Right. He was like, "No, this is the house that Lawler built," because Lawler had more sellouts than Elvis Presley ever thought about having.
Darn right. A name you just mentioned, which is etched in stone down there in Memphis, man. And it's so crazy because it just shows you how much the business has changed. Jackie Fargo, the Fargo brothers, Rough House. I mean, talk to me about those guys and how over they were in that territory.
Well, Jackie was on the first card I attended, and and he's at this point, he's this aging wrestler, but the way they booked him was so smart and so many territories.
And what year is this?
This was in '79.
Okay.
And whenever Lawler needed somebody, he would come out and say, when you really need a tag partner and you're up against a couple of guys like this, you don't need the world's best wrestler, you need the world's best fighter. So he has to. They would always do this deal where Lawler had to drive to Nashville. Sometimes Fargo would still be in his underwear, it was like early morning, and Lawler's like, begging and pleading with him, come to Memphis, be my partner, because I need your help. And then maybe the Hills might get one over on him, so then Fargo would be the one doing the interview, and he would say, "Oh, we underestimated you punks."
Yeah.
And just the way he spoke, it was like he was speaking with a mouthful of barbed wire, and just so direct, and not really having any idea of what he was going to say, but just when that camera hit, boom, he was on.
Had his version of the strut there, and that's what it popped the crowd.
Oh my gosh, yes, and we all did the strut. If you were playing sports in Memphis,
exactly.
You undoubtedly, if you were a kid growing up when I did, everyone watched that wrestling show. At one time, it was the second highest rated show in the city, right behind Dallas. And that's including prime time. It boggles the mind.
Oh yeah. I mean, they were doing numbers that Saturday Night Live, and they were just bearing consistently. Yeah. It's crazy.
I mean, everyone watched. Everyone at least had the show on. And even years later, when I got in it, it wasn't what it was. But there were so many people who, my college professors, because I was in my senior year at the University of Memphis or Memphis State when I switched heel. And it was an incredible time because I would constantly get recognized, and people would say, because I don't watch it. My son was watching it, but then it's like, what are the Moondogs really like? And they would always say something that gave away the fact.
One of those guys just died today. One of the original Moondog. I forget his name off the top of my head, but I saw.
Oh, really? Well, Larry Booker, Moondog Spot, he passed away in the ring with Lawler.
Whoa, really?
A number of years ago. And Larry was very instrumental in me actually becoming somewhat of a finish guy. Because a couple of times I would pull him aside, and it's so funny because you watch these guys for so long, and Larry was part of a tag team with Wayne Ferris, the Honky Tonk Man, and he and Lawler and Dundee had the infamous Tupelo, Mississippi concession stand brawl, where it was ECW before there was ECW.
Oh yeah,
ECW. And I think Lawler kind of bemoans the fact that in a way the Memphis territory kind of gave birth to ECW. And really
they were always. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't live in that area. My cousin lived in Louisville. Louisville. Oh. So we would occasionally. We never did get to the Louisville Gardens, but we were just like beating up pillows constantly, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah.
Yeah, and it was just like it was such a phenomenon that any kind of schoolyard ruckus, the teacher might say, "Hey, cut it out over there. This ain't Monday Night Wrestling."
Yeah, exactly.
And because they were on Channel 5, and because the number one weatherman in the city, Dave Brown, was the co-host of the show,
Well,
Big
no, hold
J.
up. I'll stop you there because I wanted to take you to how huge Channel 5 was and where that came from. So Nick Goulas and Roy Welch were the promoters up until, what is it, the late 70s, etc.?
77 is when.
Okay. And then you have Jerry Jarrett was kind of part
Yeah.
owner, and then he's like, I put 50,000 in as an option to
Yeah.
own the company, and he's like, oh no, you just whatever it was. There was a huge financial disagreement between those guys, Nick Goulas and Roy Welch and Jerry Jarrett, and so what he, as you guys call it, opened up on his own, created his own territory, and he got his star, Jerry Lawler, and then now talk about getting Lance Russell and the weatherman, like you were just talking about from the station, from the other station.
Yeah, they talked with Lance first, and Lance was the program director at WHBQ, which had the deal with Goulas, and they knew that they had Lance on board, and all Lance said was, "I think I can get Dave Brown."
Dave Brown, yeah, that's it.
And so, he was the number one weatherman in the city on Channel 13, and Lawler and Jarrett just went in and bluffed their way through a meeting with Channel 5, and they were obviously intrigued because the WHBQ show was doing so well and getting such strong numbers. But it really went to another stratosphere when Jarrett took over for a number of different reasons, which I can also get into. But they also said they also virtually promised that they were going to deliver Dave Brown, which they didn't know really. But that, so much of what wrestling used to be sort of bluffing your way through,
for sure,
and taking chances. And
I talked to Eric Bischoff, and that was kind of his thing, how he kind of BS'd his way of sorts into becoming the head of WCW. But yeah, it's timing, like you said, like professional. I mean, that was when I hear that Jerry Jarrett story, I'm like, just the timing of that so worked out for him, man. He wound up getting most of the stars, and like some of the guys like Tojo or whatever that didn't want to go, it wasn't a huge deal because those were some of the older guys anyway. And Jerry Jarrett was bringing in more of some newer flavor. I mean, it was just crazy timing for that Memphis territory.
Yeah, and Jarrett is really the one who had turned Lawler into a star. He was the one who saw something in him and broke him away from a tag team, and he was booking for Nick Goulas, particularly the Memphis end of the territory, as they called it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a really seamless transition, and Lawler had all the faith in the world in this young punk who was going to take over and do the booking. So you're right, a lot of the older guys, the veterans, didn't want to take orders from a young guy. And it proved to be a big financial mistake for Jackie Fargo and Tojo Yamamoto.
Yeah, a lot of them. And I was just speaking to the guys over at the Wrestle Talk podcast. My boy Renee's told me to tell you what's up. But people like Vern Gagne, those guys who just couldn't see the next level, the next evolution, just wind up losing their business basically because they wound up losing all their talent. And I mean, there's a lot to be said. Like there was kind of an inevitability of the territories going away anyway. But yeah, a lot of these guys, some of those promoters who just couldn't see the next phase of things, wound up suffering pretty bad.
Well, some of it too, though. You also have to realize that some of them did see it, but were reluctant. And and the rest, and especially in the wrestling business, it was so unlike Jerry Jarrett, who had the opportunity. A lot of people don't know this, but Jarrett had the opportunity to take over Southwest Championship Wrestling's time slot.
That's the Tully Blanchard's dad stuff down in Texas.
Yes, which was almost like I don't want to insult it. Maybe a Miller Lite version of Memphis. I was going to say watered down.
It kind of was. I mean, and honestly, watching USA, my memory's a little hazy, and I'm sure the records are there, but I remember Southwest had that Sunday morning time slot, and then not prime time, but All American Wrestling wound up coming in. But I think Joe Blanchard did have that time slot. That's how I wound up knowing about Scott Casey, Bob Sweetan. That's where I originally saw Ricky Morton and Ken Lucas against the Grapplers. So that's where I originally was exposed to any of those guys, was through Southwest Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, it was tremendous television, and very Memphis-like in their approach. Maybe, God, with even more blood, if that's possible. and
Right.
really, but I think Jarrett always knew when to pull back on things. He and Lawler would swap booking duties every 6 months, with maybe stints with Bill Dundee, who did a phenomenal job in Mid-South, and Dutch Mantell taking over sometimes, and they each one brought something different to the table. Jarrett, it was, whenever there was an emphasis on wrestling and the titles and Lawler going after the world champion, that's when it was a surefire sign that Jarrett was running things and Lawler was on the sideline. If suddenly Darth Vader and the Amazing Spider-Man and all these kind of characters were suddenly in the mid card, then it was probably Lawler had the book at that point. And if it was just kind of like wild, crazy gimmick matches, then that was probably a sign that Dundee was in charge. And each one, they would go about 3 or 4 months or 5 months and get burned out and then switch it over. And then you would typically have a ushering in of new talent and a new approach just to keep things fresh.
Which is hard to do in the wrestling business.
Very, especially when you're running the same towns every single week. It's really phenomenal.
They were running those shows with TV, so they couldn't, like you said, just keep doing the same matches. I mean, yeah, the programs. I remember there was like a timing to how their program. Anyway, but they had a lot on their mind. So speaking about timing, Jerry Lawler breaking his leg, and how pissed was Jerry Jarrett? Because, I mean, that was a long time he wound up being out, but that wound up creating some interesting space for Jimmy Hart. But what was that leg break? How significant was that?
If you were a Lawler fan, which I was, and this is even with Lawler being a heel, I mean, I was just a huge fan, and I kind of started, much to the chagrin of my folks and my teachers, started adapting a little bit of Lawler's mannerisms, and my friends and I, we would like kind of make the crown-shaped goatee that he had. We would make cardboard cutouts of that, color it black, and like stick it on our chins and kind of strut around and act like we were the king. It was really the closest thing that we had to a hometown sports hero. Lawler was a guy who was a skinny fan. He used to go to the matches as a kid with his father, who actually, passed away when I think Lawler was still in high school, or maybe right after he graduated, which actually led Lawler to sending in his illustrations to Lance Russell that got him the introduction to the business. And Lawler explained it to me, saying, I don't know if I was looking for a father figure or what possessed me to do it, but it was in the months following my father's death that I sent those into Lance, and Lance
that can't be understated how incredibly talented Jerry Lawler is in art and fine art and commercial art. I had no idea. It's amazing.
But that being said, it was the best. It was a long year for the promotion, but I thought it brought out the best in Jarrett. You really saw, it was almost like he pulled the proverbial strap down Lawler's big
Right.
comeback gimmick, and really pulled out all the stops. And they drew a lot of great houses. They didn't draw as consistently well, and attendance. Typically if Lawler came to a small town, I mean, the town would just stop. If he went to Union City, Tennessee, they might be in just a 1,000-seat gymnasium, but every seat would be taken.
Right.
and that can't be understated at all. I mean, it's really, but it's almost like Lawler had too good of a thing going to ever leave it. So really, the broken leg in hindsight might have been the best thing for he and the territory long term, because he was out. And the angle just basically wrote itself. Hart came out and delivered that line. What do you do when when you have a champion, a prize racehorse, and he breaks his leg? You shoot him. Yeah. And it wasn't the line. It was the fact that Jarrett gave Hart that line. And
now, was that a shoot? Did Jerry not know that? I've seen before, like he was legitimately pissed.
He did not know. And that was the thing that pissed him off. That the fact that back then, he was the one who got Hart in. Hart was basically just, I mean, it's unbelievable that they never even gave him a shot to speak before, but he was just there standing, just as a diversion, and rarely spoke in interviews at all.
And it wasn't long after he, blew up, he went up to WWE.
And just so quickly, he was so good. I mean, it's really unbelievable. But he comes off like just such a polished pro in that first thing. Like he's been dying to do this, right? And probably was, probably felt like he was about to burst because he had so much natural energy. When they first met, Jarrett thought he was on speed,
Right.
but he quickly realized this guy's just got this enthusiasm. And it's just a real shame that a lot of people didn't get to see the Jimmy Hart that was in Memphis. If you try to look for some Memphis from 1981, when the First Family, that's probably the best year of the
First
promotion.
Family.
I mean, Lawler had been gone for a year. They had not sold out. Now, one thing that's very interesting, although they did draw some great houses at the Mid-South Coliseum, they didn't sell it out once in 1980 until Lawler came back at the end of the year. It was the most packed I've ever seen it. Me, my uncle, and I were lucky to get seats, and that big 11,000 seat flying saucer shaped arena. I swear, man, when Lawler came up through the stage, he was mimicking a Kiss entrance that he had seen about a year ago or about a year before that at the Mid-South. And they did the smoke and they played the theme from 2001 way before Flair thought about playing it. And Lawler comes up through the smoke, and it's just it's primitive by today's standards,
but it looked cool as hell back in the day.
It's the loud, and he has the he's just pointing number one. He's got the crown, he's got the scepter, and man, that the pop it's the biggest you've ever heard. I've got it actually on my YouTube page, and it's almost like that.
To see that.
It's almost like that arena was just going to shake and fly off into the sky, man. And when Lawler would pull that strap and make the comeback, the fans would it was like this chant of boom every time he connected.
I know. When you look back and watch that footage, like I always thought that was just kind of a modern thing, but when you go, my perception, like I said, because I didn't see it often, it would always be that wide shot of the Coliseum. You'd see that spaceship formation kind of on top, and just a packed crowd, that white mat. And it would just the energy in that, it was just so freaking palpable. It was crazy. When who was it? I forget who pile drove, or it was Lawler maybe. Pile drove Road Warrior Hawk on his head, and he stands up. I mean, the place just goes absolutely berserk. I mean, Memphis was just insane.
And Hawk never forgot that. He would always, like, whenever they would cross paths, Hawk would always say, "This guy made me in Memphis," because not too many people got to be, I think only Ken Patera is the only man who probably ever kicked out of a Lawler pile driver, even remotely.
Especially back then. That's why, I mean, we can kind of get into, like, man, finishers are called finishers for a reason. Come on, don't have to hit somebody with 12 pile drivers and then pin them. That's what kind of messed up with wrestling today. But other angles, man, what was it? I think it was Austin Idol and Tommy Rich was under the ring. Another huge pop. Tell me about that angle.
Well, I was there because it was very unusual. They rarely did a gimmick like this. But during the week, there would be this commercial coming up promoting the Saturday Wrestling Show, which really didn't need any introduction or promo like that. But Lance would say, "Be sure to tune in this Saturday for the biggest announcement in the promotion's history." And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I was
that sounds important.
And I was a junior in high school, or maybe maybe a sophomore, and I think it was the end of my sophomore year, and I'd been reading the Wrestling Observer for about 2 years at that point, and so I thought I was a really smart guy and a really smart fan.
Dave Meltzer.
Yes, and I thought I can understand the way some people might look at what they called the dirt sheets back then. But for me, it was like opening up this whole new world, and I just absolutely loved it because I wanted to know everything I could about the business, but you were very limited with what you could get, because the magazines, the after mags that were sold on the newsstands, fed that illusion that everything you saw was real, and they were very good at what they did, and I can't help but think that my obsession with those magazines growing up, without a doubt, led me to becoming a writer. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's absolutely true.
Bro, no, I'd sell this story. I mean, look, when I was this age watching 505, in my time zone it was 505. I know everybody calls it 605, but in my time zone it was 505. Every single Saturday for a multitude of years, my friend, I would take my allowance. I'd go to Aladdin's Castle and play a few video games. I would go to the Dairy Queen and buy my 65-cent hot fudge sundae. And right next to the Dairy Queen was in the mall. I lived right next to a mall. Was Walgreens, and they would have Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler Pro. So I would sit there and read wrestling magazines for like 2-3 hours, and then about 4:30, because I live like 100 yards from the mall, I'd walk home and watch wrestling.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
my
that's good.
ritual.
That's good. That's you and I would have been fast friends back then.
And
Because
I was totally believed because it was really weird because it was all the pictures. I mean, like I literally had only watched Georgia for the most part. That little stint of Southwest, go to my cousins, maybe peep out a little Memphis. I was aware of all these other territories, but it was all just through the pictures and everything. And it's kind of weird that I'm 45 and like in the last maybe 10 years, I've got more of an understanding of the business of wrestling that I've loved so much than, obviously a kid, I don't understand it, but I'm hanging out drinking beers with Manny Fernandez after matches. I'm like, dude, you were my guy. I would flying burrito pillows when I was a kid. Like I'd stuff my little snowsuits with pillows and I would flying burrito. I mean, it's so funny, but yeah, wrestling, man, wrestling.
yeah, man. It's
Why is it, man? Jerry Lawler. I liked Jerry Lawler. Why is it when I watch shoot stuff? Why is there some heat on Jerry? Why does Harley Race have so much heat with not necessarily him, but I mean just generally speaking? Do they look at him as like, man, you couldn't have done what you did outside of Memphis kind of thing? Because you know how territorial wrestlers are and all that other, you couldn't draw here, you couldn't draw there. Well, sometimes it's true, but I don't think that's necessarily true with Jerry. Why does he get so much flack?
Well, I don't, that's the case with some of the guys, but if you really listen to the ones who matter, and I'm not saying that Harley doesn't matter, but Jack Briscoe, guys who worked with Lawler, who actually worked programs with Lawler and just didn't work the occasional bout. Jack Briscoe, Nick Bockwinkel, these guys I think would be on anybody's top 5 list. Terry Funk, they all put Lawler over as being an incredible worker, a guy who certainly could have held the NWA World Heavyweight title. And I think in Harley's case, he didn't find it amusing as some of the other guys did, the self-promotion that Lawler engaged in, and some of the tactics that Jarrett used to help get his young star over. But the fact is, this was the direction that Jarrett was going, and taking a chance on Lawler when he was 24 years old and selling, practically, this entire year where they were doing this quest for the title, because Jarrett didn't believe in bringing in the world champion, but maybe 2 or 3 times a year tops. And so, but he would get all this mileage out of it. Like he would book the champion in August and start something in January.
Right.
To where he's almost booking the champion multiple times, because the storyline is who's going to get the shot when the world champion comes to town. And in Lawler's case, Lawler came out there and said, he had won the Southern Heavyweight title. He had beaten Fargo, and now he was going to go through all the NWA's top 10 contenders. Right. And so they basically, looked in the aftermags, and whoever they could get actual dates on who were in the top 10, they did. And then they kind of filled in the rest of the top 10 themselves. But it was as close to real
for sure
as you could get. And they called the Sheik in. And Lawler goes, man, he goes, we didn't really discuss a finish. And we bring him in, and I go in his dressing room, and we're talking for about 20 minutes, and he's really taking a liking to me. And finally he goes, so who's this young punk I'm working with? And Lawler goes, that would be me, sir. And he goes, I guess he just thought I was some guy who set up the ring.
Right.
And he said the Sheik looked him up and down and just went, oh, God. But the Sheik was very instrumental because he was the one who actually taught Lawler the fire gimmick. So, but they, they go out there and it's a double disqualification because Ed Farhat, who is one of the true originals in the wrestling business, is not going to put this kid over clean, right? Even though he's getting that, probably a couple of grand for coming in and doing this, which in 1974 was a lot of money, but still would not put this young kid over because he had never heard of him. He's not going to put him over in his hometown. So they would do the double DQ, but then Lawler would, edit the footage. And he would come out, and because he's a heel, he could say, I whipped the Sheik. I don't care what you think you saw. I'm telling you, he is history. I beat him. And Lance would try to interrupt, and Lawler would just shout him down, and Lance would just roll his eyes, right? But so a lot of people found out about this, and they didn't like the way that they went about doing business. But actually, if those guys had really been professionals and done the right thing, which is, hey, pay what, do what the guy says. He's paying you thousands of dollars to come in here. Do the right thing for the business. And it was all, it was not like Lance was in on it or the promotion would necessarily go along with it, but it was always like Lawler would shout down whatever Lance was trying to say. No, you didn't pin him. It was a double disqual. No. And then it would be on to the next guy. And so Jarrett's always said, if not in actuality, then with a little creative editing, Lawler beat everybody in the country. And even after Briscoe lost the title to Terry Funk, Lawler runs back to the ring, and Memphis Magazine, which had been doing an article on him, he told him, "Hey, I'm wrestling for the world title. I think I'm going to win it this week. You better have your best photographer down there." And so the photographer had this elaborate backdrop, this black backdrop set up, and Lawler runs back there with the belt because they did kind of a screwy finish. And Lawler sits and takes pictures for like 10 minutes.
Is that where that came from?
Yes.
Holy shit. I was just wondering. I saw that and I told him, I'm like, how did you get a hold of that? How did that happen? Because, I mean, those guys are quite covetous of their belts. Wow.
Yeah,
Inside scoop.
He's like, hurry up, take my picture.
I know, exactly.
And then Terry comes back. Terry comes back. He's like, hey, Terry. Yeah, great match. Yeah, here you go. And hands the belt off.
Wow.
And then 2 weeks later, bam, Lawler's on the cover of Memphis Magazine wearing the NWA World Title.
The damage had been done.
Yes,
That's hilarious.
Yes. And Terry's one of those guys who loves that kind of stuff, He loved the fact that Lawler sent pictures to Bill Apter and says, "Hey, why don't you do a little story? Look at the size difference here. Like a midget beat Andre the Giant or something like that."
Yeah.
And Bill Apter runs with it, and Vince McMahon Sr. gets all pissed off about it, and Funk thought that kind of stuff was funny, but you got to understand it was a different time.
Oh, for sure.
And a lot of people are not going to think that's funny.
I was going to say, I'm sure that caused quite a bit of heat. That is no joke right there. You're playing games with the strap.
But Lawler had
10
a lot,
pounds of gold, baby.
But basically, Lawler had a good thing going, and a lot of people didn't like it, and he didn't have to travel outside the Memphis territory. And then especially in the early 80s, you'll see that he's not on a lot of Louisville cards, which is a man, that's a hellacious drive, especially when you were in the business when I was in it. By the time I was in it, and we were only drawing about 2,000 to 3,000 people at the Mid-South Coliseum, you had to love it.
Yeah. And what year is that? Like towards the end there? What year were you talking about?
94 through 96.
Okay.
And again, I started out as a referee, and I had some friends in the audience. And this is how, you just sort of manipulated things. And I had befriended Eddie Gilbert, which
I was going to ask you about Eddie Gilbert. Some Eddie stories.
Yeah. Basically, I bugged him outside a WCW show in Jackson, Tennessee, because you had to. I was looking for a way in. And the only way you could do that is if you just bugged the hell out of somebody who was in some way connected with the business. And I went up to Eddie and I was talking about the booking committee, and I just explained who I was. And I was whispering to him. He was signing some autographs, and he was kind of talking smart back to me, like, and oh yeah, what did you think of this angle? And I'm like telling him, and I think I dropped Dave Meltzer's name and all this kind of stuff, and then we meet up the next night in Memphis. Like WCW was in Jackson, and the next night they were in Memphis, and we meet up before the matches, and we had a beer and talked some more, and then when I got in through Kevin Lawler. And basically, I knew a guy who he goes, "Oh, I know Kevin Lawler. You guys should, you should." And I was like, "Give me his number," and I didn't know Kevin at all. But
Kevin Lawler.
Yeah, I knew he was Jerry Lawler's son, and I called him up, and
that's not the son who recently passed away, Scott.
No, that's Brian.
Brian, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm thinking Scotty Too Hotty. I'm thinking of the other guy.
Sorry. So I became friends with Kevin and Brian, and what was really interesting about that. We were watching, I think, a WWF show, and I said something like, "Oh, man, I don't know what they're doing with this guy. They need to turn him babyface." And Brian Lawler looked at me, and he's like, "What's a babyface?" And I was like, "What? Good guy." And he's like, "Why are you calling him a babyface?" And I had to explain, like, the whole, like, Jerry Lawler had never smartened him up. They were in high school. They were in high school at this point. But of course back then, sometimes you did and sometimes you didn't. And I think I think Jerry didn't want his kids to follow him in the business. Number one, he didn't want people to think he had a son old enough to wrestle, which is sort of why I think Brian kept, his middle name as his surname for so long. But we started doing outlaw shows together, and then one night I was just hanging out, and one of the longtime referees that had just been fired, and it was just sort of the right place, right time, and Jerry asked Kevin, he's like, hey, who's your friend there, and ask him if he wants to referee. And I just show up, and I'm like, hell yeah. And I just thought maybe I'd do it a few times so they found somebody else, but I guess I did a good job. But
I mean, this is, of course, after you've already been on Memphis TV, right? I mean...
Well, no, I was just a fan. I was like hanging out. And,
this is the beginning before that. Okay, I'm sorry.
At the very beginning, and I was given the opportunity to referee, and I did. But even then, I started thinking about, what if I got a chance to turn heel? So I would come to the ring as a referee, but I wouldn't wear a referee shirt. I would wear a starched polo. And actually, I was pledging a fraternity at Memphis State, and I would wear my fraternity pin on the thing
nice.
to wear, and I got tons of heat with the fans.
You were being you, right?
Yes. I was coming out in that stuff, and I wouldn't smart off to the fans, and I didn't show any favoritism to the heels or any of that kind of stuff. But I was being myself and dressing like I was going to like a Southeastern Conference football game, like you would with your date. Like I was wearing like really nice shit to the ring, and the fans just hated it. I mean, I was absolutely the most hated referee, just because of my appearance. And so
that's awesome.
And I had some friends in the audience, and my girlfriend was there, and I asked Eddie, I said, hey, I know you guys are looking for some kind of way out of this tag match. I said, why don't you throw the fire at Lawler? And he ducks, and it hits me, and it's just a big schmoz. And so my girlfriend.
No, hold on, man. I got something you just overlooked, man. I don't mean to interrupt you, but the fireball. How? That's one of the. No, seriously, fire in wrestling. That was some of the. Not the first time, but talk to me about how throwing the fireball, how that worked, and how impactful it was to people who've never seen it before.
Well, and what's really strange to a lot of people is when they hear Lance Russell sometimes call it. It almost sounds like Lawler's coming out with an arm drag. It's like, Lawler comes out of the corner with a ball of fire. Like it's just, unorthodox maybe, but at that point, not at all shocked because it had been a staple of his arsenal for so long. Without a doubt, and this is another weird thing about Memphis, Lawler was easily the dirtiest babyface, especially a hometown babyface you've ever seen. We talked about his finisher, the pile driver. That was an illegal hold.
Really?
Yes, because when he pile drived Andy Kaufman, he technically.
So you jumped the gun. I would definitely want to talk about that too. But yeah.
He loses the bout by disqualification technically, because and it's so funny because in Memphis so much stuff would go. You'd get thrown into the ring post, hit with a chair, hit with a chain sometimes, and the referee lets it go. But man, you do the pile driver. Yeah. And whoa, that's it.
You're sitting here bringing logic to an illogical situation, man. Come on, this is professional wrestling here.
But you build that up. You build that up as the one hold that you can't use in the state of Tennessee. And somebody even told me, but it may have been Cornette, and I'm not sure if he was ribbing me or not, but that indeed it was on the books of the Athletic Commission at some point that was an automatic disqualification. It was actually in the record book for professional wrestling, or the rule book rather, that was only probably 3 pages long.
It is a devastating maneuver. Who was it that got driven through the table? That was one of the first times I saw that. Was it Ricky Morton?
Yeah, I was there that night too. It was June of 1984, and it's crazy that I remember that, but that was one of the biggest cards.
I was 11.
Yeah. Well,
that's fantastic.
I was 13, I guess, right?
Well, no, still those are the days, man. The beautiful days.
And I swear to you, I looked at my friend. And I said, "Oh my God, Randy Savage just killed Ricky Morton."
Randy Savage, that's who did it. That's right.
Yes, I had never seen, and it still looks. I don't know how they did it, because back then they didn't gimmick tables.
And watch it, and whatever. We all know the veil's been lifted, but watching, it was a great match, like the Terry Funk Ric Flair match. Like watching him take his pile driver on the table was so painful because he has his hand on his boots, like he's so bracing himself. I'm like, oh my God, just flashback to Ricky Morton, you know what I mean, taking a real, not real pile driver, but just selling it way better than. Anyway, not knocking Rick. I love Rick. Trying to get him on our show, but.
Oh yeah. No, I love Rick too, but that's actually probably the smart way to do a spot like that.
For sure.
But man, it didn't look anything like the Randy. I mean, it looks like Savage just murders him, and that was the great thing about wrestling. You know, you're like going, oh my God, that had to be a mistake. That had to be, you know, because oh my gosh, because you've got it entrenched in your mind that this is the most devastating maneuver.
Exactly. That's why they've taken so much of the juice away from finishers being finishers, because you have to do it like 50 times, like back to what you're talking about. I mean, you could still believe today, if done right, a pile driver would finish you off. Your head being driven. I mean, Stone Cold Steve Austin's career is basically over, partially because Owen Hart's, he wasn't a pile driver, but it was like whatever kind of a tombstone kind of thing. But, you know.
Well, and nothing was wrong with the spot, the way it was called. It was his delivery of it.
Owen?
Yeah, because he couldn't protect him that way. With you know, he needed to do a tombstone pile driver. And I don't know if in the back of his mind, oh, wait a minute, nobody can do a tombstone because of the Undertaker.
Well, I don't. I mean, I'm thinking about it now. I mean, part of Owen didn't seem like a tall guy. He was kind of short, so picking him up, it's hard to kind of move him up more, so his head's not so right in between your legs. But I mean, I don't know. It was, you know.
Yeah, and you know, when the Lawler called that spot on me, you know, I was thrilled that I was going to take a. I was thrilled, but I was also scared to death, you know, because I had no idea of kind of how, I mean, I could sort of figure it out, but no one ever said, oh, this is how you're going to protect yourself. I mean, it was like all this stuff I had to learn on the fly.
He wouldn't do those just like pick you up as a pile driver and just drop. He would do like jumping pile drivers.
Yeah.
Like
he actually fooled Paul Bosch, the legendary
Houston
performer. Sent him a telegram after the Andy Kaufman thing.
Yeah, he said, thank you for finishing me off. And so we might as well just segue into that, man. That, again, this is why, unless you were there for real during, like, the kayfabe era. I watched a video the other day of Ox Baker just repeatedly heart-punching Ernie Ladd in some Cleveland, Ohio wrestling match or whatever, and it was a full-on freaking riot, brother. Like, they thought he was killing Ernie Ladd. And all of that. And that's why I love, like, Jim Cornette's fire when he is so protective of the business that we know. And I get it. It's different now. Vince done said it's sports entertainment. But, I mean, I don't know. I think there's still room for some kind of happy medium of, you know, kayfabe still. But I digress.
No, I'm with you. And to me, it's everything. So much in WWE is not left up to the boys, you know. You have to be able to find your character by finding the character's voice and by finding your own voice. And I don't see how most of them are going to be able to do that.
I heard Dana Warrior is part of the creative team.
Yeah, when you get when you're delivered a scripted promo and told to follow that, you know, I might be given 2 or 3 things to hit, you know, before I walked out. And that was great, you know, and some of my early promos were better than others. They were usually right on point if I had Lance guiding me, because it was like, you know, Ric Flair carrying a jabroni, right? And Lance, and plus I'd been waiting for that moment my entire life. You know, if you grew up in Memphis, we had backyard wrestling, but we weren't diving off the top of our house.
Right.
We would keep it safe. It was like we were
for sure
subconsciously following what Lawler and everybody would do.
Exactly.
We knew that the best parts weren't the athletic moves necessarily, especially at that time. It was more the psychology of it.
Yeah.
And the best parts of the stuff that we would watch back were the interviews. And so that's what we would do. We would film ourselves doing interviews. So when I went out with Lance and did that whole thing, and they had actually told me to go out and apologize for kicking Lawler in the back of the head. Because Eddie had the idea. He's like, oh, if you really want to freak your girlfriend out, why don't we switch you heel? And the plan was for me to do that, and we did it. And my friends, they said that, you know, my buddy goes, I don't know if I've ever been speechless before. he goes,
That's
but
awesome.
I looked at what was happening. It was like it was happening in slow motion, and you ran out after the referee got bumped. The original referee ran out from the back. You looked around. I thought you were going to count 3, and that was going to be like a happy ending because he got up and you kicked Lawler in the back of the head. And this play, he goes, man, everyone came unglued.
That's
and
so cool,
and he
man.
goes, and most of them are going, I told you about that asshole. I told you. So everything that I'd been like subconsciously doing, you know.
But they believe. So going back to what I was saying, I mean, kind of, I lost my train of thought a little bit. But the Andy Kaufman, like, that's when people believed, man. And Andy Kaufman was a freaking genius. That first interaction or whatever it was when he pile drove him. I mean, they could have rolled him out of the ring and he could have walked back. He's like, no, I don't care. I will pay for it. You bring an ambulance in here to roll me out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That was like how it went down. And then the Dave Letterman thing, like, talk to me about your thoughts, dude. Like you said, I mean, you were probably there in some capacity. How over that was.
Yeah, I was watching it. Well, it didn't air live, but and actually Lawler thought that they weren't going to air it. I mean, that's how controversial it was at the time.
Well, and according to him, it wasn't even for, hey, Andy, here's what we're going to do. But in that moment, he said we locked eyes, and it's like he just gave it to him. I mean, you talk about a full-on shoot, man. That was awesome.
But that's so much like what it was like working in Memphis all the time. Like, you would sort of talk about some things, but you had to be ready to adapt, especially because it was a live show. And so, you know, when I went out there, I said, how many times am I going to get the opportunity to cut a promo alongside Lance Russell, and I'm supposed to go out and apologize? And so I went out there and I said, he goes, well, what was the idea of kicking Lawler in the back of the head like that? And I said, well, he's pushed me around. He's ignored all the rules. He thinks he's bigger than the promotion. So I stomped him like the cockroach that he is. And Kevin says, man, he goes, man, my dad, his eyes got big. He's like, what the hell is he doing out there? Oh my God. But you know, Lance just started dancing with me, and it turned out to be good. And Lawler I went to the back, and I thought, okay, there's a good chance I'm going to get punched out here. And Lawler waves me over. He's like, come here. And he's like, all right, Scott, I see. And he goes, so that was good, but next time, do what we tell you to say. I said, okay.
Wow. Fortune favors the bold, man, and it paid off for you, though, right?
But I'm not, and I mentioned that I was put in that position, and I ran with it, and a lot of guys did that. Stone Cold maybe thought about that line with, and I'm not comparing myself to Stone Cold. I'm just talking about guys from the Territory era who were on that live Memphis show who maybe stuttered through their first few promos or whatever. They all know about opportunity, and he may have thought about that line with Jake Roberts, but probably didn't necessarily plan on saying it. But then he saw, it basically, all those John 3:16 signs, because Jake was working that born again Christian gimmick, and I say gimmick because he ended up knowing. It was sort of. He was sort of trying to find his way, but he found his way to he was supposed to appear in Memphis against Lawler, and the deal was he was going to DDT me and put the snake on me. I was so excited, and he no-showed.
That was when Jake was still dealing with his demons, man. He seemed to come out the other end. He seems to definitely come out the other end. Well, I mean, as the territories kind of have come and gone of sorts, talk to me about that end, if you will, of Mid-South morphing into whatever it was, USWA, and kind of trying to tag up with WCCW World Class down the line. But talk to me about, even before that, man, that match between Jerry Lawler and Kerry Von Erich. That was, I forget the name of the pay-per-view off the top of my head, but how much of a cluster that was, because when they get to the ring, for whatever reason, Kerry's bleeding from the underneath his arm. But was that just kind of doomed to failure from jump? I mean, isn't it kind of like the last two people on the Titanic jumping off as far as the territories? Because I get it, man. They were trying to team up and do something in the face of the behemoth Vince McMahon and the WWE, but it just didn't.
No, what happened was, unfortunately, the week-to-week survival at that point was more important than the big picture. And Jarrett had been able to convince Vern Gagne to finally put the AWA title on Lawler in May of '88, and really that was the overarching storyline of the promotion for the better part of a decade. They would have these crazy feuds or whatever, but the main thing was always Lawler getting back in position to go after the world title, and always coming up heartbreakingly short. Jarrett even had the foresight to create his own world champion at a time that you absolutely did not do that. They had the CWA World Heavyweight title, and I knew from reading the magazines that there was no CWA title that I'd ever heard of, and that the only champions were Harley Race, Bob Backlund, and Nick Bockwinkel.
Right.
And really, especially in Memphis, Nick Bockwinkel became the World Heavyweight champion because Nick was easier to get dates on.
Right.
Jarrett thought he was a better worker than Harley, and that's part of the reason. That's part of Harley's sour grapes. And and don't get me wrong, I love Harley Race, and the hour-long Broadway that he had with Lawler in December of '77 is one of my favorite matches. And I'm just a huge fan of his body of work in Japan. Just an absolute legend.
I've been on a bit of a Harley bender lately. I told Nick I'll just want to talk to him. I don't know why. I've just been like watching all of his old stuff. It's crazy.
Just so super smooth, and just could make anybody look good, and really was the perfect guy for that role. But Bockwinkel brought a lot more personality, just the arrogance, the natural arrogance, and really played that role of the Beverly Hills champion you believed that Nick Bockwinkel was first class. Just the name.
It kind of embodied that natural progression of what was going on then. Your 70s wrestlers, your Dory Funks, your Gene Kiniskis, and then kind of moving into kind of that 80s era, like you said, Nick Bockwinkel, and then obviously culminating with your Ric Flair. Fascinating how the aesthetic kind of changed, how what we, the archetype of a champion changed.
Because typically you had to be almost like a real sportsman, to get that title.
Exactly.
Jack Briscoe was a legit amateur and brought that air of class to it. Terry Funk was really the first time that they kind of got away from the formula, and Terry brought more of that wild, brawling style and really a unique promo. And he would wear it kind of like the bizarre looking robe, almost like a version of Randy Savage in a way, because he was the maniacal Funk, and it was right there with Dory as far as being a technician, but just in a different style.
It's weird. Dory held it for 4.5 years. That's just so interesting because you just don't see that.
No,
you won't see that anymore. But it's just like you said.
And Briscoe held it, I think for close to 2, and at the end was begging them to take it off him.
Which is interesting, and I whatever documentary that is on the WWE network, the history of the World Heavyweight Championship, which is pretty comprehensive stuff. But yeah, he was just like and that makes sense to me, man. Especially back in the territory days, the travel. He's like, I'd wake up and have to look at my plane ticket, like, where am I? Like that's crazy, man. And those guys didn't just wrestle, man. They partied and stuff too. So it's like that has to wear on you.
Yeah. The schedule was just, and the role then was always the storyline of, wow, the local guy held the champion to a 60-minute draw. So, they were doing, they didn't do it every night like they like to claim now when they look back at things, but they were doing it a lot. Probably at least twice a week, 3 times a week, doing hour-long Broadways. Just working a grueling pace.
And that's just crazy because I don't know if you'll ever quite see that, but like I said, I just had on the NWA champ Nick Aldis, and kind of what they're trying to emulate, which isn't so much like he said, and they've said, we're not buying a promotion, buying a ring and necessarily a roster of guys. We got an NWA champ. It's more of it's a kind of just different how they're applying it. But they're still going around to just whatever different arenas and different territories in the world, taking on their top guy. It's almost like a streamlined NWA. You know what I mean? It almost fits the whole 21st century model of wrestling, in my opinion. But like the great Herb Simmons, St. Louis wrestling promoter, says, it's about longevity. But what are your thoughts on like the NWA and what they got going on now?
I want to believe it. I like the approach of it. It's interesting to see what's going to happen with AEW. The guy I listened to, I can't think of his name now, the guy who owns it, but he was on Jericho's podcast, and he sounds like a guy I would love to, go have a beer with or do a podcast with, like I'm doing with you. Somebody who appreciates the territory era understands how it worked and how not only the TV show, but also the live shows had to be episodic. And
Absolutely.
you know, you had to build toward something else. And one of the things that I think is crucial that's lost today, and I don't know will ever come back, is one reason why the guys always knew the big picture is because they all traveled together. And you know, Jarrett had kind of an open door. If you wanted to come to the office meetings, you could. So everybody kind of knew where they stood and understood the big picture of where they were going. And if something didn't work, then they would pull the plug on it.
Well, even the road, man. I'm a geek on these shoot interviews. Even like particularly Harley race, like, you know, you'd get basically off work around 10:30, 11 o'clock. You'd go, stack up a cooler of beer, and kind of your job was just kind of keep handing Harley beers. But to sit under, basically, for lack of a better term, these learning trees on the road, hours of hearing about the business is definitely lost.
Yeah, and and I got to experience the tail end of that, and it was fantastic and everything you would want it to be except for the money.
Which is so funny, brother, because I should have opened with this. Scott and I met originally. And I don't know how much you want to be able to discuss this because I kind of want to segue this between the owner of AEW, who is a multimillionaire. He's the son of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And are you cool with talking NWL a little bit?
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay. But, I mean, I always thought, man, in my mind, I was like, man, all there needs to be is somebody with a shit ton of money that could really present a product. And then along came a gentleman who presented the NWL. And there were ads, and they were looking for an announcer, so they wound up flying me down. Long story short, I did an audition. It was like a 3-tiered audition. I think I met Chris Goff, great guy, and like the second one was Scott, and we talked. I mean, I don't know, didn't go well. I didn't get the job, but that's okay. Go home and like find out who Scott was, and I'm like, holy shit! It's kind of good that I didn't know who you like really, really were before I met you, because I probably would have sat there and just like not left. But I mean, how tried and true you are to like Memphis wrestling. Like I said, I threw my hat in the ring as far as trying to be an announcer for NWL, which didn't go where I thought it probably should have gone. Can you speak, if you don't mind, like what happened with the NWL? You guys had the dough. I know you kind of parted ways a little bit early on because you got your own stuff going out in LA, but apparently it's just not about the money, because this guy in Jacksonville, he's got a lot of money, but
it's hard for me to say because I honestly was not after I left Kansas City. I didn't look back, I guess. I mean, I was disappointed that it didn't work out.
So were you brought in by those guys? Brought you in?
Yeah. I actually, and this goes back to my college days, and I had a good friend who was a huge Memphis Wrestling fan, who was really tight with Major. And the introduction came that way, and he had basically been telling, and Major pitched me the concept. I didn't quite understand the city angle too much, because even though like Memphis and Nashville are kind of rivals, and Memphis and Louisville have that thing, I didn't know how strong an issue that could be between two cities.
The St. Louis, Kansas City.
Yeah, that the angling of where you're going to have a St. Louis promotion feuding with the Kansas City promotion.
I thought that was dope. Me personally, I thought that was dope.
I liked it.
And if it's going to work, and I was thinking if it's going to work anywhere, it's going to be St. Louis, the former hub of the NWA, etc. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I liked it. It excited me because it was something that they're currently doing, and it was playing off real emotion. But I guess I did, not being from that area, I guess in a way I didn't understand the personal animosity between the two cities.
Because like you said, Jerry Jarrett had the thing, personal issues make money.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but when you don't understand the issue, I think that I kind of went in with that disadvantage. And I think that I was more into like, doing like some really personal stuff to get heat. And I grew up watching Memphis wrestling, and it was just entirely in a way, it planted the seeds for ECW and WWE. I think it was very influential and innovative. They were the first promotion to do music videos. They were really the first ones who brought entrances to the state-of-the-art production that you see now. Now, granted, guys had used music before. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Lawler, being strapped to the ceiling of the Mid-South Coliseum with an old guy.
The vignettes, man.
Yeah, like
Jimmy Valiant, dude. Yeah. I was born in a
exactly.
TWA.
All these great music videos and stuff like that were coming out in 78, 79. I mean, they were so far ahead of their time. And then with the advent of MTV and Memphis kind of following suit, and Jimmy Hart was very instrumental and going that direction with the different music videos that were just like what you would see on MTV with the Rock and Roll Express and the Fabulous Ones, and coming up with those gimmicks and splitting those two crews up, or the Fabs would headline one show and Lawler and the Rock and Roll the other. And just
would you say the Fabs, the Fabulous Ones, man? People don't understand the impact of the Fabulous Ones.
Sorry, and a lot of people like to kind of pick on the Fabs today because some of the pictures and the videos.
Oh, dude, some of the video that everybody wants you. It's like, dude, those are straight some homoerotic shit, dude. I have to say.
No, totally.
Some Chippendale, but it was the 80s. It was the 80s.
But the reason why it worked is because they had Fargo's blessing.
Exactly.
That's why the Fabs didn't get over anywhere near to the level that they did previously.
Well, and then they tried to remake them so many times, which was just whack. After the original, Steve Curran, Stan Lane, like those guys, that was even when they that little switch they would do sometimes, that old basic switcheroo, like want to jump out, that was awesome back in the day.
Well, also, but another thing too, like they had Fargo's blessing, and Fargo was the legend, and so for him to pick these guys, and they initially didn't wear the short tights, they had just long tights, and that was by design. And they had bloodbaths. They didn't have like these Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express matches that are so state of the art, where everything's almost, it's almost a little too smooth. I'm not knocking the guy. I mean, they're two of my all-time favorite tag teams.
Watch out now, watch out.
No. I love those guys. But it was like a machine, right?
Yeah.
And the Fabs got over in Memphis because, they had the look, they had Fargo's blessing, and the matches were bloodbaths that they had with the Moondogs and Duke Myers and Bobby Eaton, Coco Ware and Bobby Eaton, who's that's one of my all-time favorite underrated tag teams.
Bobby Eaton, dude. I mean, that guy.
Bobby Eaton and Coco Ware, man. Don't think about Coco Beware. I'm talking about.
That wasn't PYT, right? Wasn't it PYT was something else?
PYT was Coco and Norvell Austin, who was kind of a aging veteran who was trying to rejuvenate his career with the PYT gimmick.
Right.
They basically came out with the Michael Jackson gimmick. And
yes, of course.
The whole thing. But Coco was a hell of a worker. I say back in the day, but it was like a lot of guys when they went to WWF, they lost their edge. Jimmy Hart, he figured out, I think, the best way to stay out of trouble. Do your job, and that's what he did. He was not the loose cannon that he was in Memphis, where you never, he didn't even know what he was going to say next, let alone the boys. And that was so much of what made him just a phenomenal performer.
So per kind of the beginning of the question, like the NWL, it wasn't for you. That wasn't something, the direction you were wanting to go.
That would be kind of a cop out. To be honest with you, it wasn't the right time for me. I was having to fly between LA and Kansas City, and it wasn't working out. I had quit like a really good job, and the plan was that I was going to write for a year because I had a really good job where I was doing film promotions for Disney and Pixar and some others. And it started getting exciting because some of their promotional partners that we would get, like Dole, they started paying attention to what we were doing, and we started getting a lot of consumer product business. And so I was really growing with this small agency. We started off in a guy's house, and then like 9 months later, we're in the Taft Building at the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and Vine, where Chaplin used to have an office.
Nice.
And it was just this fantastic. It was like walking into the building Mad Men. But with palm trees everywhere. It was a phenomenal thing. But I got so burned out after two 2.5 years of basically working 11-hour days, and where I was doing everything. I was like in this position where I was senior copywriter, doing a lot of things, and I quit. And so I've been doing that deal, and it was great for a while. And I was writing, and I was happy, and I had some money saved. And then I got this opportunity to go and do this, and I couldn't turn it down, but I probably should have.
It's funny. I mean, it's crazy how things work out. And when I read about it, and I'd kind of heard about it because I'm here in St. Louis, and the scuttlebutt was, pretty heavy about it. And I have friends in KC, so it was really cool. Like I said, they flew me out, we talked, and all that other stuff. And it's, I have family here. I have 2 daughters. Like one's, now 21, and the other one's 11. But at that time, that would have been 3 or 4 years ago, whatever it was. It would have really sucked to have had to have moved there and kind of I would have put my heart and soul into it, brother. You better believe that. And then to have it just would have sucked to have done that and have it shut down eventually. Because part of the whole carrot that they were, or whatever, was like, man, we're going to sell this eventually for hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever it was. And I'm a mark, so I'm like, fuck yeah, dude, let's do this shit. So that was my
yeah. If you were a fan of the Territory days, you had to be mesmerized by Major's pitch for it and his enthusiasm for it. I mean, and I do. I love the guy. I'm not knocking anybody there. It was mostly totally on me. It was the right opportunity, but I think the wrong time.
Dude, I had Major on my podcast, or this podcast here. It's Me Speaking to You. This is a while ago, and it was great to talk to him, man. I've had on Herb Simmons, you, Bob Backlund. I mean, I've talked to a little bit of everybody, but it was interesting listening to him and pick his brain because we just start talking wrestling angles, and I'm like, yeah, dude. I'm like, we need that authenticity back in the Nitro days when the invasion when the outsiders came in, when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came in. You thought that shit was real. He told me he wasn't familiar with that. He had never heard of that before. He had never seen that. And I was just like, it was just a red flag for me, dude, because I'm just like, whoa. I know Chris Goff's very talented because Metro Pro was a beast, and but I'm just like, man, Boss Man doesn't know one of the dopest angles in professional wrestling.
I don't know, though, because Major knew. I said something kind of offhand, like, I thought as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, that was stupid, because I think it was during my interview. I said, it's sort of like a deal like with David Von Erich and Jim Garvin, where the stipulation on the surface sounds ridiculous, but the execution of it came off so personal. when Sunshine and Garvin had to be Von Erich's valet, and he knew exactly what I was talking about because he was mostly a WWF guy growing up, which I think in some ways he couldn't help himself but sort of present it like WWF because that was his thing,
right?
And I kind of wanted it to go the Memphis way, but really the biggest thing it was totally on me, and just some stuff that I was going through at home and really second guessing myself about leaving the other job and trying to write and go back and forth between here and Kansas City, and then when the weeks I was working here in LA could be challenging because of the time difference.
For sure.
And yeah, man.
Hindsight's 20/20.
If I could do it over again, number one, I probably wouldn't do it. But if
your heart was in the right place, man, I feel you.
Yeah, but if I did, I don't think I gave Major my all, and I really regret that. And
because like I said, once I came home and I saw who you were, I'm like, and I saw that you had left so early, I'm just like, holy shit, dude, like that's a huge component. I know Chris is very capable, and I know obviously I hadn't really talked to Major much, but he obviously had the dough. But I was like, wow, man, you're straight Memphis pedigree like that, and like that's what we need. That's what this machine needed.
If you recall though, man, I mean, we were doing I didn't feel comfortable there, and I heard your audition, I think, because I was shit. So you were super smooth, man, and part of it is I didn't feel comfortable, and I'd been out of it for so long, and part of me was doubting myself because I had never actually been a booker. It was sort of a dream job for me. And I think it was sort of like I intimidated myself out of the position because I was always like, it's got to work. It's got to work. This has been my dream. It's been my dream.
I mean, again, hindsight's 20/20, man, and clearly your heart was in the right place. I mean, I would just love to see that NWL now. I mean, with something like the NWA champion touring around to different promotions, if you will, and territories, defending the. I mean, that just could be so dope and so reminiscent of. I mean, I don't know. Again.
And again, I liked Chris Goff a lot, and he was probably my favorite person there. But I got along great with Major too most of the time. And I even though I didn't follow it initially because it hurt to follow it because it didn't work out, and I was relieved in a sense, but I was also heartbroken about it.
Yeah. I went to several shows here in St. Louis, man. I got myself a T-shirt. I love the presentation, man, especially the venue they had down. It's kind of a shady area down on Cherokee a little bit, but some ballroom or something. But it just looked dope. I think the presentation was dope. Something that bothered me, dude, and this is just probably just me, man. And what are your thoughts on this? Like the wrestlers would come out afterwards, like you would see them, like they would come out and like mingle around in the crowd, and it's like I don't know. Wahoo McDaniel would have never fucking done that. And am I being Jim Cornette about it? Like,
No, I felt like kind of that's what I sort of felt. I felt like kind of the old guard. I felt like
they're too accessible, dude. They're too accessible.
Even the first show I went to at I guess it was one of Chris's shows, just so I could get familiar with some of the talent that Major was interested in. All the the gates or the doors to the building weren't open yet technically, but there were a lot of people walking around, and they were either I don't know, I didn't know, nobody knew who anybody was really,
right?
And the guys are in there like trying out moves and stuff, and I'm like, dude,
I know, right?
What but part of that though I think is like me not getting like what it's like today, and this is what these guys do on the circuit.
Does
and
it have to be that? I mean,
yeah, no, I know.
Like what Beyond the Mat. I just watched it the other day. Jim Cornette said when he was talking to the two young wrestlers having a little try, he's like, "You're telling them the story; they're not telling you the story." And like the wrestlers and the wrestling promotions have way much more control. I know times are different. I get it, but it's just like I'm talking about like cats were coming out after matches still in their gear. I don't know, man. I'm old school, so I'm just.
No, I'm with you the same way, man. And I acted that way. I wouldn't be an asshole to anyone when I was in it, but I was taught that you didn't do that.
No.
And even as a babyface, I think it was detrimental for guys to go to a gimmick table. I understand that they have to make money some way, and if you're not drawing like you did in years past, in the golden era, the territory era, then you got to do whatever it takes. But you lose something with that. You lose the aura.
Yeah, exactly. Part of the aura and part of the mystique is kind of the psychology, and like Jim Cornette says, I mean, and this is kind of in a more micro version. Like, how can I miss you if you've never been gone? Like I said, people are they're too accessible. They have to create that aura and kind of let it, live up to it a little bit.
The only time we ever saw the boys, back in the day, I mean, it was completely accidental or maybe at a personal appearance, and it was really like you were meeting somebody. I mean, I remember the first time I met Lawler, it was at one of his softball games, and I had an uncle who sort of knew him, and I was introduced to him then, and I remember being so nervous. It's kind of funny to think about that now because in some ways I'm probably still a Lawler mark, or that guy who had the crown-shaped goatee.
For sure.
That guy.
That's the power of pro wrestling, bro.
Exactly, man. And it's not that we all believe for so. There was a time, obviously, when I first started watching that I did think it was real, but as I got older, I knew it wasn't, but I wanted to believe that it was.
Dude, when I was a kid, I was a huge Magnum TA mark, dude. When Magnum came up, and most people make like a world championship belt. I didn't, dude. I made out of whatever it was. I made it out of aluminum foil, a bunch of other stuff. The old U.S. belt that was shaped like the NWA belt, but it was the U.S. belt. I wish I still had that just to like.
Oh, dude, I'm a huge belt mark. And Dave Milliken, who makes a lot of the belts that you see today, I've known Dave for a long time, and he got into it exactly that way. He would make cardboard replicas.
Oh, it was dope. I mean, the one I made was
you
so
know,
sweet. It was really, really sweet, actually.
but and that's a great thing too. The guys who were fans of the business and got into it that way, and kind of put themselves in that position. In a way, my stuff, it was lucky, but I would recently I've been having these long chats with Jerry Jarrett, for a book I'm working on, and we're just talking about. He goes, did you always know that you were going to do this, even if it didn't turn out to be your career? I said, absolutely. I absolutely believed it. And even though it was sort of some fluke things that happened and kind of fell into place, I was always ready for it. And I was always doing little things,
like you said, doing little vignettes with your boys, little interviews.
Yeah. and like, oh, Kevin Lawler? I call him. There's Eddie Gilbert. I'm going to talk smart to him. And then I actually followed him to a liquor store. And I was like, hey, Eddie, I talked to you earlier. And he's like, oh, okay.
That's weird.
Yeah, it is. It was a little weird, but then that's how we got to. He goes, oh, we're going to be in Memphis tomorrow. Why don't you hook up with us before the matches? And and it's every opportunity that was presented to me.
That's
I took
hilarious. I think they call those stalkers now, Scott. I'm not sure.
Hey man, but that's I tried to do that with Cornette, and he sort of looked at me like, you're not here.
I have asked him so many times on Twitter to be on. Actually, when I was doing this, I mean, I could just talk his ear off like I'm doing yours. But we met back about 5-6 years ago, just like at a meeting. He was at some matches here for SICW in St. Louis with Herb Simmons. I felt so bad because I bought both of his books. I just watched Memphis Heat, and I've just been a huge Cornette fan. And everyone's lined up to talk to him. I'm just like a total dick, just talking his head off, and he just probably wanted me to shut the hell up. But we had a great conversation. He's a cool guy. Got a picture with him.
Yeah, he's fantastic, and I've been lucky to have him on the show a few times. We've had this ongoing debate whether or not it was the real Mil Mascaras in Memphis, teaming with Austin Idol, working as a heel against Lawler and Jackie Fargo on my very first show back in January 29th, 1979, because Jared had a thing for bringing in ringers occasionally. Like,
Mascaras.
Yeah, they might advertise Mr. Wrestling, but it might be Dickie Steinborn under the hood and not Tim Woods.
Oh, no.
But Jared insists that it was him. But the Tennessee Athletic Commission report, this buddy of mine, Mark James, who has some great Memphis books, he dug up this report, and it says Francisco Flores, who possibly could have pulled it off under hood, but I asked Jared about it, and he goes, no. He goes, Mil Mascaras, it was a once in a lifetime deal that we were going to get him in Memphis, and because he was friends with Salvador Luderoth, who was a legendary promoter in Mexico, and through that, people don't understand the relationship, the power of relationships back in the territory days, and that's why those unique set of circumstances are what brought Mil Mascaras to Memphis, and he did a stretcher job for Lawler and Fargo.
Stretcher job, nice.
I know, and especially when Mascaras has this reputation for not even selling an offense, let alone doing the stretcher job. And Jarrett goes, yes, and it was actually he who insisted.
Yeah, that's what's really.
Like, wait a minute.
That's what I've heard in my readings and whatever. I mean, not that that means anything, but that he was always kind of rough to do business with, Mil Mascaras.
Yes, but a lot of people go, well, he never sold for anybody. That couldn't have been him. But what you don't understand is that how do you know what he did every single night?
That's like I mean, and I'm definitely geeking out right here, but that's like when Ted DiBiase had heat and a thing going with Tommy Rich, and Tommy Rich was banned, and he came in as Mr. R, and then Brad Armstrong came in as Mr. R and started fighting Ted DiBiase. I'm like, that's not Tommy Rich. You could clearly was like Brad Armstrong's way of fighting, so you could just kind of tell it was a completely different person. And then obviously Tommy came out. That was part of the whole shtick, but Tommy Rich.
And I don't know I don't know why the necessary detail. Like they both had the matching jumpsuits because I guess they had to hide Tommy's physique or lack of physique. But I love Tommy. It was a thrill.
And I'm sorry I asked you earlier. I don't know if we covered it already, but that Austin Idol, Tommy Rich in the cage.
Oh,
Talk to me how that played out. You said you were there. Like how huge was that? And take us through that match was between. Just let that ride.
Yeah. Lawler had just beaten Idol in a chain match, and it was one of those creative Memphis finishes that is just you would never see anywhere else but Memphis. You're promised a chain match, so you think it's going to be this bloody affair, and you've got to drag a guy to all four ring posts and tap each one to get the pin, or
Yes.
I think in this case they were going to do it where it was just a straight pinfall, like you could use the chain on your opponent, and then you just had to pin him, right? Uh, you're already going against the grain with the traditional chain match rules, but Lawler, the referee puts the chain on Lawler, and he's going to hook Idol up, and Idol's protesting like, I'm not going to do this, da 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 da. He's like bitching and complaining to me, and he's got his back to Lawler, or kind of turned sideways, and he's just really selling it with the referee, like, I'm not going to do this. Lawler slips the chain and duct tapes. It's all just when you think you've thought of every use for duct tape, Lawler duct tapes the chain to the corner. And so then finally the referee gets the chain on Idol. Idol tugs. And he's like, wait. And Lawler's got it slipped through. Lawler reaches into his trunks, pulls out a chain that he often, that was the equivalent of brass knuckles.
Right.
It was almost like because it was a lot more visual because you could wrap it around.
Little dog chain. It was like kind of like dog collar chain.
Yeah, exactly. So Lawler would slowly wrap it around so everyone could see it, right? Everyone but the referee. And he wraps the chain around, and Idol can't go anywhere. And Lawler just pounds him as soon as the ref rings the bell, and wins the Southern Heavyweight title in record time. It goes like 7 seconds. And so Idol's furious. He wants a rematch. Lawler says, no way. I don't have to defend it for 30 days. So Idol comes up with the stipulation. He was in a plane crash years ago, same plane crash that killed Bobby Shane, as a matter of fact. And he had this settlement from the insurance company. He gives Eddie Marlin, the promoter, $50,000 in cash, and if he can't beat Jerry Lawler in a hair versus hair match, so Idol puts up $50,000, and all the fans who come out to the matches, everyone I'm walking out, they'll get their money back if he doesn't beat Lawler, if he doesn't do what he says he's going to do. So the fans are going in there, and for years Lawler's been in hair matches, and he's never had his head shaved. You thought it was impossible. And given Lawler's, Lawler had a variety show that came on, a talk show that came on Sunday mornings, staple of the community, did so many commercials, you thought it'll never happen. There's no way that he can lose it. I look at it, I'm the smart fan. I'm like, okay, there's got to be an angle here. There's no way they're going to give away all the money, right? So there's got to, and as soon as I saw them set up the chat, I got fourth row tickets because based on what Lance Russell was saying, this is going to be the biggest announcement in Memphis history. As soon as tickets went on sale, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew it had to be big. So before, like on Friday, I went down to the ticket office and got as close as I could get was fourth row. And then they do the announcement on TV. And as soon as they set that cage up, they'd never set up a cage quite like it before. It was massive, but it was away from the ring. And I thought, oh my gosh, Tommy Rich is under the ring. And
you immediately thought that?
Yes. I'm not kidding. A lot of people say, oh, no, come on now. And the reason why that is, because if you stop and think about it, Kevin Sullivan and Dusty Rhodes had done that finish before. In Florida, and I'd seen it in the aftermath.
I hadn't seen that.
Okay, I'd seen it, and so I was like, because you got to think, okay, what are they possibly going to do? And Rich had been out selling, I think, like a broken forearm, so he had not been around in like 3 or 4 weeks, so that added to it. But I was sitting there thinking, and that's exactly what they did. At 3:00, right when the guy got through setting up the ring, they had Tommy Rich in the back of like Jerry Jarrett's car, or maybe Guy Coffey, who was with the Athletic Commission for a while, for years, and then became Jarrett's right-hand man when that ran its course. And Tommy snuck out, and with barely, virtually nobody in the arena got under the ring, and he was there at 3:00, and the matches don't even start till 8.
Are you serious?
Yes.
I know. I heard that he was under there for a long. I heard he had a 6-pack of beer under there.
He had a 12-pack of beer, or depends on who you.
Had to be? Oh, wait a minute. So he got under there at 3 p.m. and the matches didn't even start for 5 hours.
He got in there. I'm not even kidding you. A lot of people think I'm making up this last part, but the last part didn't come out till later, and I talked to Tommy. I'm not bullshitting you here. I heard it was a case of beer, and if you think about the timeline, it had to be a case, a bucket that he could piss in, and a bucket of KFC. So that night was really the birth of Kentucky Fried Wrestling right there.
Are you kidding me? What
No.
the hell? So and
'Cause he
then,
was
and
there-
then the matches. Wait a minute. The matches then start at 8. And is that the main event? Is that what 2 hours?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
the
he's
main
under
event.
there for what, 7 hours?
Yeah, the show would always end like clockwork at like between 10:15 and 10:30. And so
Kentucky
dude,
Fried
typically
Kentucky.
even-
That's where it came from. Okay.
even with a hot finish like that, fans typically, even though they were pissed off, they'd seen it all before in Memphis until that.
Okay, but sorry, close that out. How that match?
So Lawler's got Idol, in a bad way. Paul Heyman, who's really catching fire, as a heel manager.
Paul E. Dangerously.
Yeah, Paul. He's Paulie Dangerously there for some reason. Not dangerously.
The movie hadn't come out yet. That Johnny Dangerous.
No, he had, but for some reason they I don't know why they changed it from dangerously. To maybe they thought they were going to get sued or something. But so Heyman had all this heat with the boys and the fans, really. But I thought he was a tremendous talent. I really did. Nobody was ever going to take Jimmy Hart's place, but Heyman was good.
I mean, look at where he's at now, still tried and true, deep in the WWE. I mean, the guy's Sorry, go ahead.
Lawler has Idol about to finish him off, and Tommy Rich comes out from under the ring, attacks Lawler. Lance does a beautiful job selling it, and just going crazy, like, what in the world? The cage door is still locked. How can anybody? How can he get in there?
He's been under there the last 8 hours. Holy shit.
Yeah. And people might think that that's ridiculous, but that's how protected things were. You didn't have guys.
This is what I said to. I'm sorry to
Exactly.
Nick Aldis back last week. Ricky Steamboat, when him and Ric Flair had the angle back in the Mid-Atlantic days where Rick rubbed his face in the thing. He goes backstage or whatever, and Harley Race is like, dude, get the toughest gauge sandpaper, and they sanded his face so he can go to Pro Wrestling Illustrated and take those pictures where he literally has. I mean, that's how dedicated these guys were to the game.
Yeah, dude, and if you got hit, by accident and broke your nose or something like that, everybody's like, it's good for the business,
right?
Because we can turn it into something.
But that crowd went nuts that night when Tommy Rich came out from under the thing, and him and Austin Idol just went at. This is obviously how over Jerry Lawler was, but I mean, that's just awesome booking, man.
And that's at a time. This is in 1986, and you've already got promotions going under.
Yeah.
And losing money. That year, they started off. I was there for the beginning of that feud, and it all started over the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. Lawler got the shot over Idol and Rich, and Idol and Rich were both baby faces, and they turned because of that issue. And the fans believed it because the world champion didn't come in very often in Memphis, and when he did, it was a special deal. And for Lawler to get it, you knew that it was not likely to come around again anytime soon. And so for them to, throw their friendship aside and for Idol to sucker punch Lawler, he sucker punches Lawler January of '86. Lawler bleeds a gusher, and then he goes 60 minutes with Bockwinkel. And I think that it was tremendous, and it was a hell of a way to kick off that feud. And then they come back the next week. Lawler wrestles them both in singles matches because there's no alliance between those two. But then Lawler burns Rich with the fireball, which we've covered. And then during his match with Idol, Rich comes out from the back and they post Lawler, and it's like this alliance comes together. Just it's natural in a sense, and you believe it. It's not like a sudden thing that happens. They're kind of forced together,
right?
Because they have this common enemy in Lawler, and they drew like incredible houses. Memphis would get like weeks and weeks of matches. That first feud that I talked about between he and Dundee, they did the same main event headlining in Memphis and drew between 7,000 and 11,000 people every Monday night. I think for like 9 straight weeks. I mean, that's incredible.
For sure. Well, I mean, and this was kind of in, for lack of a better term, the death throes. Like all the territories were kind of bleeding at that point. The USWA, like I said, linked up with. How did that happen, man? Him and Jerry linking up with Fritz to do that little stint with WCCW World Class Championship Wrestling?
Jared had always wanted to do a unification deal with the World Championships. That's what he had in mind when he created that title for Lawler in '79. It was the CWA title. They brought superstar Billy Graham in. Which is a great idea. Graham had been all over the magazines, and I thought he was like, he's like almost like in 3D. He had the tie-dye rocking when nobody else did. He had the look, the build that nobody else had.
When are they bringing in Superstar? When he's the champ?
And '79, they brought him in like a year after he had lost the title to Backlund, and they said that he was or they actually had him win the CWA World title from this journeyman named Pat McGinnis, and the whole deal, and they had like a fancy belt made and all this kind of stuff, or their attempt at a fancy belt. It didn't quite turn out. It didn't turn out that great, but
is that square one? Is that weird?
It looks like a license plate.
Oh my God, I think that is quite, in my opinion, one of the most reprehensible championship belts I've ever seen in the world of professional wrestling.
But anyway,
a license plate.
And Billy Robinson ran off with it. And from what I understand, that years later, Jarrett was able to get a hold of him, and he's like, Billy, look, I'm not going to use it or anything, but for personal reasons, because I really want that belt back. And Billy goes, "Oh, my wife took it in the divorce,"
Are you kidding?
which might be the only way you could ever get a belt off Billy Robinson. Mrs. Robinson was the only one who could ever get that belt off him.
My old friend.
Oh, here we go. That might be a good way to wrap that up. But yeah, you're right, dude. People were, I'm not even kidding you. Like, the drunks around ringside were climbing the cage. I was not one of them. I just want to.
It was hot though. I mean, it was one of those like riotous moments, man.
And even though most of those people there, this is in '87, and I think we were maybe a year removed from Vince admitting to the Athletic Commission in New Jersey, right, that it was all a show.
Yeah.
And this is after the 2020 expose. So if a lot of people still knew, right, that it was, if 80% of the people in its heyday in the kayfabe era didn't believe that it was on the up and up, but they willingly checked their disbelief at the door.
Well, and I say that
it must have been like 95%.
This goes back to
in '86.
You're absolutely right.
Presented. Yeah, it's the way
this is what Jim said. Like, you guys are in wrestler that we're telling them the story. They're not telling us the story. Like I said to somebody one time talking about professional wrestling, like that people pay shit tons of money to go watch Jurassic Park. They know those aren't real, Tyrannosaurus Rexes running after you, but they still go pay to see it and get the shit scared out of them. I mean, it's the art of storytelling.
What's really bizarre is the fact that they don't let the heels get as much heat as they used to, and the baby faces don't sell quite like they used to. And I'll never understand it. And if they're so sophisticated now, where they've educated the audience that wins and losses don't matter, then what's the problem with selling? That's how you're going to get more people behind you. It's not being on offense. That's not how. Yeah. That's not how to get the fans to rally around you. No. Lawler in every match, Lance would say, "Oh gosh, I've seen this so many times. Jerry's just a slow starter." and Lawler would sell most of the match, and then at the end, he would get that second win, and the crowd would get behind him. He'd try to make the comeback. You'd think he's about to pull the strap before he can. Right, it's like Popeye and the spinach. Before he can, he slips out of his hand. But the heel cuts him off, and then the crowd goes back down. And they're basically playing the audience like a piano, and the fans would start stomping their feet. The fans would call for it, if you can believe that.
No, I mean that's what I'm saying.
And once they got to that point, the fans were stomping, and then they get to the feet, they're getting to their feet, and Lawler starts getting to his feet, and then he pulls the strap, and they're all in that with each punch that Lawler's throwing, the fans are it's like they're behind it, and they're adding to the force of the blow, even though it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah, but at the time, man, it was just a special period of the business. And even though I know that some of the very best at the top are enjoying what it is now and enjoying the fruits of their labor, I know without a doubt there's that wicked fascination with how it used to be.
There absolutely has to be.
When you had that much emotion behind it, And again, if you weren't there, I don't know. It's like when you hear about people talking about the '60s or
that's what I've always
Woodstock.
wondered. Well, it's
It's
just
a
one
little
of those
like that.
things. I think you're absolutely right. And as I get older, I'm like, man, I wish I could just like transfer this into people so you could realize what Jim Crockett Promotions in the mid '80s was, dude. That was just like absolutely insane. All right,
Yeah,
man. I don't want to keep you
yeah.
too much longer, but we lost. I mean, a huge part of that Mid-South, Mid-South, Memphis. I apologize. Territory, etc. With the loss of Lance Russell, man, he was the voice of Memphis wrestling, like literally a staple, just like Gordon Soley and all these other cats who were just like Jim Rosses of their territories. Give me some good or give me a good Lance Russell story and what he meant to you in that territory.
Well, I'll tell you. I've already told you the interview story, but
Yeah,
I will
course,
say
yeah.
that one of the things, the best moment in that promo, it's the very first one I ever did, and it all goes great. I'm not really looking at the right camera, but but other than that, it's pretty smooth. And I did not know that Lance was going to say this, but Eddie Gilbert comes out. And he's like, I say, Eddie Gilbert's my best friend now. He's the only one who believes in me. And Lance goes, oh, boy, I tell you what. He goes, if Eddie Gilbert's your best friend, people judge you by the folks you hang out with. And I'm like, oh, okay, Dad. Okay, Dad. And man, Lance, he said, he came up to me after. He goes, oh, Scott. He goes, I almost lost it when you said that, when you pulled that. Okay,
That's
Dad.
awesome.
So he goes, that was great. And I can't help but think back to the first time that I spoke to Lance. It was at the matches, and Jumbo Tsuruta had just beaten Bockwinkel for the AWA title in Japan, and I just wondered what this meant for Lawler. And so I got Lance's autograph on a program, and I said, Lance, what do you think about Jerry's chances against this Jumbo Tsuruta? And because I didn't know how to say his last name. Who just beat Bockwinkel for the world title. Do you think Lawler can beat him? He's like, well, I tell you, as we all know, Jerry's a slow starter. I'm like, yes, I know. He's like, his ability to absorb punishment is second to none. He's got a low center of gravity, so he's hard to take off his feet. He can absorb that kind of punishment, whereas you and I can't. He's like, the longer the match goes, and we all know that Lawler can take a beating, right? The longer the match goes, the more frustrated he becomes if he doesn't put you away early.
Wow.
And in that moment, Lawler can take him. And I went, oh, I thought I had like really inside information, because that's how much clout. And the fact that Lance, and from then on, I was like, oh, it's Jumbo Tsuruta.
Right.
Because Lance, helped me out there. I go, what's this Jumbo Tsuruta?
Tsuruta. Yeah, it's one of those
exactly.
TS names. It's like Paul Tasongas. It's
for a Southern boy, that was a tough one. But Lance helped me out. He goes, Jumbo Tsuruta. Yes.
Man,
And,
I swear.
He outlined that thing for me, and I told everybody I knew. I was like, if they can sign that match, he's got him. He's got him.
Obviously, you've seen the documentary Memphis Heat. Are you cool with that rendition?
Yeah, no, I loved it. I mean, there's only so much you can do in a certain amount of time, but I really liked it.
I mean, for me, it really chronicled like kind of Memphis wrestling from its really the beginnings, Nick Goulas, and it's kind of the transformation and how TV came in and how Jerry Jarrett really capitalized on that move to grab the two guys that Lance Russell and what was his name,
Dave Brown.
Yeah, I mean that's just a genius stroke, and it changed the face of wrestling. I mean, it really blew up from that point. I mean, Memphis wrestling, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and greatly influenced the product that you see today.
Well, and it's weird because I was hearing the documentaries. Vince would be like right here, like, oh, you're trying to do some Memphis, or Vince was really kind of some of the things I've heard about Vince McMahon. He kind of frowns upon, like, oh, that's kind of Memphis. You know what I mean? I get what he's saying, but have you heard of that? Like, Vince.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's sort of kind of, oh, you want to do that Memphis shit, or that's
exactly. Yeah.
Tennessee wrestling. But if you really look at it, especially.
What do you mean, that over shit? Yeah, let's do that over shit, Vince.
Yeah, that stuff that drew every week and drew the highest TV ratings. Oh, that stuff. Because Memphis is one of those sounds. Vince did not. It took him a while to find an audience in Memphis. I mean, they would have Hogan on top and draw like 1,000, 2,000 people. Atlanta was the same way. I mean, eventually, he did win over the towns, but they didn't go away quietly, and Jarrett and Lawler were the last ones standing at the end of it. But then
and now it's been so long, like now there's like that's why we need to continue having these conversations, and just to keep this kind of lineage alive, because Vince has kind of monopolized the whole kind of history of wrestling, and it's not really fair because he doesn't give a lot of shine to things that he didn't create so much.
Yeah, I guess those who win can tell history.
Well, that's it. That is how history is written by the winners, right?
The way they want. Yeah, but there are enough of us around though who remember the territory guys who paved the way, and especially a promotion like Memphis that was different from most that you will see out there. And again, that's for better or for worse. I mean, Memphis brought a lot of the showmanship and a lot of the crazy stuff that you see today, but they also had their feet firmly planted in the fact that believability was so important, or the willingness to present a product that the fans didn't feel insulted, taking seriously, checking their disbelief at the door was. And it's interesting that Jarrett always looked at. He told me, he goes, I didn't look at it as a TV show. He goes, I looked at it as a Shakespearean play.
Exactly. And that's what I said to Nick Aldis, man. This kind of formula goes back to Aristotle, the Aristotelian plot curve of, rising action, climax, falling action. It's the same thing we see every day. It's just, how you dictate it, how you present it to people. I mean, I know Vince kind of ruined it with saying, we all know magic isn't real, but when we see David Blaine do whatever the hell he does, we're still like, what the fuck, dude? How'd you just do that?
Yeah, and it's one thing is when it's presented in a tongue-in-cheek manner, and the announcers are always on and full of energy, who have no credibility whatsoever because of that. Jarrett would tell Lance and Dave, he's like, when you're going over the lineup and when the TV show's unfolding and you're talking about what's coming up Monday night at the Mid-South Coliseum, because basically the Saturday morning show was a commercial for the Monday night show, which is, technically I guess was against the law because you're really not supposed to do that. But anyway, But Lance, if he didn't like, he wouldn't gush about it. He wouldn't go. If he personally didn't like it, he would, because it was important that he maintain his credibility. But when he said, "Wow, this looks like it could be," he wouldn't say it was, but he would say,
"Yeah,
this could be the match of the year." I mean, wow, this is.
You got to sign up for it.
Yeah, and
Lance said
absolutely. But if he did that every week, if everything were so big, then you wouldn't know when he was telling the truth. And so they called it like, they reacted to it and they listened, and they, if they weren't that up for it, they wouldn't.
Well,
and
I don't know how much they were like hip to the game and stuff, or like, figured in as far as, letting people know what was up, or letting them know what was up. But they played it so straight. It was like they didn't know. It was like you said, these news guys, one's a weatherman, and it's like they were just reporting on wrestling. And
and
what you just did was egregious, and it was a travesty, and you will be held accountable for your actions. I mean,
and Lance could do more with like just a just a sound,
right,
or a roll of the eyes, when Hart was going on and on, and each one were like Lance could get a little riled up, but it was rare that Dave did. But on the I mean, maybe when Dave Brown lost his temper when they did a really personal angle, this led to the last sellout at the Coliseum in '87. In 1987, they're still selling out the Mid-South Coliseum. It's amazing. Nearly 12,000 people.
Does that building still stand? Is that gone now?
It does, and it looks like it's been saved. I don't think they quite know what it's going to be yet, but they're looking to turn it in.
I saw you post some pictures of chairs with Mid-South Coliseum on the back. Where'd those come from?
Those are still in the building. I toured the building last fall, and for all intents and purposes, it's still it was sad in a way because the lights aren't on, but I think they are now. And they've actually got investors lined up, and if they had their druthers, I think it would be a mid-size arena where they would bring in maybe acts that were popular in the past, and they would have like a Memphis Wrestling Museum and a Rock and Roll Museum, and basically strip away a lot of the seating and turn it into a mid-sized arena, and people might be into it for the nostalgia factor. And it's actually, acoustic-wise, it's a tremendous venue to perform in. So I wish them the best. they've at least saved it because they were going to demolish the building.
That's what I remember hearing. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just like I said, as a kid, seeing that visual of wrestling going on in there, such a gem, man. Like just to again, folks, the rich history of Memphis wrestling. I suggest go check out Memphis Heat, the true story or the real story of Memphis wrestling. This is obviously the season of WrestleMania, my friend. Do you have any thoughts on what's going on in WrestleMania this year? Any picks?
I'm just glad that it's baseball season. I'm kidding.
I'm with you, dude. I'm with you. I was just talking to a friend on, like I said, the Wrestle Talk podcast with Joe and Renee. I think this might be one of the lowest rated WrestleManias. I don't know. It's almost
Yeah,
They're struggling. They're struggling. It seems like, but then again, like Eric Bischoff said, they have one of the top streaming networks and top 3 streaming networks, and like of all streaming networks, or top 3 or top 5. So
it's phenomenal. I mean, they still, the branding is just incredible, and that's the uphill battle that a lot of these promotions, and that's part of the problem I think that Major ran into. WWE only comes a few times a year, and it's kind of a special thing when they come. And I just don't know how feasible it is to draw every 2 weeks like Major was trying to do. God bless him for trying. But it would take like a real understanding, I think, of what drew in the past, and trying to present it in such a way where I think the fans want to believe in the wrestlers again, and they want to believe in the product, and they want to have it treated like a sport. And in some ways, I think WWE is making inroads in certain ways with the way they've handled the women's division in a sense. But you
have a women's championship triple-way match headlining WrestleMania this year.
Yeah, and they've done some good things there. But Cornette had a great point. Lawler, even when he was a babyface, he always believed he was the greatest wrestler in the world, and was arrogant, and Dundee too, even when he was a babyface, and the Fabs and the Rock and Roll, these guys, they didn't go out there and do a teary-eyed promo like, I can't believe this is my dream. Everybody can't play that part, and that's not necessarily what a babyface should be.
Right.
He can be likable by going in there and being cocky and going, I deserve that spot, I fought for it, I'm going to kick some ass, and because if everybody's out there boohooing and nobody's actually out there with an edge and just happy where they are, and you fans should be happy that I'm even out here.
Right.
You're so lucky to have me.
Right.
And you can't actually be a babyface that way, because if you believe in yourself, then the fans will believe in you too. And not everybody can go out there and be so humble and crying on their title belts.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh my God, boyhood dream. That works for Shawn Michaels, but not, it's not. Not everybody
into kind of that anti-hero formula of just like, it's me against the world, and like everybody can kind of identify with that because the world's all screwed everyone over, and that's why Stone Cold, go ahead and stun your boss. I mean, kind of.
But that's where you get into trouble with doing scripted promos, because you almost don't have a choice when it's written for you. You can't look at what everybody else is doing and go into a character. Oh, if everybody's screaming and shouting, I'm going to be the one who talks real low.
Right.
If you look at Ric Flair's appearance in Memphis, the first part of it, he's different than he is almost anywhere else, and I think it's a tremendous thing, because you get the explosion, you get the excited Ric Flair, you get the cocky Ric Flair later after Lawler shows him up, but he comes in and he's like, Mr. Russell, you're a very competent announcer.
Yeah.
Right. And it sounds like Rick talking to a guy outside the ring.
Yeah.
Like
he only really loses his shit when you put him on blast, or like you make him look silly or whatever. That's totally true.
But if all you see is the arrogance, and all you see is him preening and prancing and all this kind of stuff, then it's not effective when he loses this shit. I'm the world champion. You don't do this to me. You don't embarrass me.
Exactly.
And all that kind of stuff. And that had to be Jarrett's handling of his appearance there, and telling and giving direction, because you didn't see Ric Flair do that anywhere else really. So anyway, check it out. Check out some YouTube. Check me out on kfrpod.com.
There we go.
You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Kentucky Fried Wrasslin. You can find me on Twitter at Travis Scott Bowden. My website, Kentucky Fried Wrasslin, will be back up shortly. Like I said, I am working on a book, and I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with the website. So it will be up soon. I can promise you that.
Man, I can't thank you enough. I was trying to keep you for an hour, but I knew it. It would slip away. It's been almost 2 hours, and I apologize. Man, Scott Bowden, I really appreciate it, man. You are a wealth and quite the encyclopedia of the type of wrestling that I grew up with, that so many of us grew up with, and we are kind of the last vestiges, last Mohicans, trying to keep this alive, bro. Because, look, man, we lost, like, Roddy Piper recently, Dusty Rhodes, they're gone. Roddy Piper is gone. Like, I'm freaking out, man. When we lose Rick, I'm like, what am I going to do? I mean,
I know. It's like Lance said about Lou Thez. Dave Meltzer called him up, and Lou passed away, legendary NWA world champion. And so, what do you think about Lou's passing? And Lance just said, I thought he could never die. And in a way, in regards to Lance, and that felt like my grandfather had died. It felt like a trusted neighbor who came down every Saturday morning and sat on my couch and had a piece of pie and talked about the wrestling matches.
Yeah.
And so many people even if you didn't live in Memphis. I had a friend of mine who said, I think you had to live here to get it. And that's the thing. People who found Memphis later, they did get it, and they thought Lance was wonderful. Maybe a little too, of a homer, and for some people, and I can understand that,
but not even like that. I mean, just that territory, man. Like my cousin, shout out to my cousin Richard P, who lived in Louisville, man. I mean, that all that area that it touched. I mean, as a professional wrestling fan as a kid, like that's the Walter Cronkite of your life, and as you get older and he passes away, it's just like, wow, man, that was kind of a portion of the soundtrack of my life.
Yeah, and it's those guys were so much larger than life that it's hard to believe that they could leave us. I wasn't even the biggest Dusty fan in the world, but it did hit me, man. I remember exactly where I was when I found out about Dusty and Piper.
Oh my God, I was laying in my bed when Dusty died, and a gentleman posted, and I hopped up because I had because it was Magnum Chie's birthday. He died on Magnum Chie's birthday, so I was just like, I was already looking at something about Magnum, and then that popped up. I'm like, whoa, this is the same date. And then I was at work when someone texted me like, Roddy Piper is dead. I'm just like, it was literally almost 2 months, dude. I'm serious. It was Jimmy Snuka. I mean, just think about it. We're just losing them. But that's the nature of things. That's what I'm saying. That's why these conversations are so important. I actually spoke with Larry Madison, kind of the voice of Wrestling at the Chase, about a year before he passed. I mean, I just have that in the archives, man. I mean, it's there. I mean, these things need to be kept alive because professional wrestling in the era we're speaking, that was the business, man. It was the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed it, man. And my wife's going to kill me. I better get off here. But,
I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Scott Bowden, ladies and gentlemen, follow everything he just said. I will post it here in the description of the video and the audio, rather.
Wait a minute. One last thing.
Yes, sir.
My last name is Bowden.
What'd I say? Bowden?
That's all right.
I'm sorry.
I got to clear you up on that just really quickly.
Scott Bowden,
just like Bobby Bowden.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
Scott Bowden, ladies and gentlemen. Peace and so much love. Thank you again so much for your time, sir. Take care.
No problem.
See you guys.